Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Association of the United States Army's annual conference and trade show in Washington, D.C., the #1 gathering of U.S. Army leaders from around the world. Our coverage here is sponsored by General Motors Defense, Bell, L3 Harris, and Leonardo DRS, and we're here at the TRADOC area, standing for the United States Army's Training and Doctrine Command to talk to the Deputy Commanding General of TRADOC, General Ted Martin, who is also one of the few people here who can trace their heritage to a soldier in the Revolutionary War, Private Dan Martin of New Jersey. Sir, it's a pleasure seeing you again.
Good seeing you again, too.
We had a great conversation at Quad A, if I recall correctly, talking a little bit about this transition to a great power force, mirroring a little bit the Army you joined earlier in your career during the Cold War when you were a tanker, and a tanker in Europe, in fact.
Still a tanker.
You're still a tanker, correct?
I'm a tanker for life.
That's right. We were talking about breaking track, and Dr. Jetty was talking about robots trying to improve the lot of a tanker in the future. And I think at the end of the day, there are a lot of tankers who are still going to be wet in the mud while they're breaking track. But let's talk a little bit about going up that skill set. The Secretary and the Chief have talked about the importance of, in 2028, of having a multi-domain capable Army as part of that overall joint force. Secretary Esper is pushing that, obviously, from a department standpoint. Talk to us about the specifics of doing this, because TRADOC is the command that prepares everybody for this. You're doing exercises at the National Training Center and all the Joint Readiness Training. I mean, all of the facilities are working on this. Talk to us about how you guys are cumulatively building up that great power capability.
Well, sure. I think though we got to go back in time just a little bit to kind of figure out where we are. And the most important thing is, you know, we just have a newly installed Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville, and the Undersecretary of the Army was recently confirmed as the Secretary of the Army. And as you know, this push for modernization and moving into the the 21st century full tilt started under Secretary Esper and General Milley. It has not changed one bit. I mean, if there's really only one takeaway from this AUSA meeting, is a confirmation that the path that was started by Secretary Esper and General Milley is picking up speed and staying on the same course with Secretary McCarthy and General McConville. So that puts us in a good place because for the first time in decades, our Army is not only preparing for war, we're getting materially ready for the type of war we may face. And 2028 is the mark on the wall. It's a challenge, if you will.
How are the training exercises changing, right? I mean, one of the criticisms sometimes of war games and training exercises is that they're designed to actually reinforce existing beliefs as opposed to truly challenging them at the end of the day. You know, some folks were talking about what National Training Center was sort of the Kobayashi Maru scenario where you went out there and you got your butt kicked no matter how clever you were. Part of that was to put a little bit of humility in you that the OPFOR forced you to try to do everything you can and still whooped you. How are you making that training as realistic as possible, as challenging as possible for the environment we're going into?
Well, so in our position in Training and Doctrine Command, we have to look all the way from the tactical, which is combat training centers, part of that revolution that happened coming out of the Vietnam War, and then all the way up to the strategic level. And I think, looking at what you're going to see in 2020 with at the exercise Defender 2020 in Europe. General Cavoli, the forces in Europe, NATO, everybody banding together to conduct, for probably the first time in 25 years, the scale, type, and complexity of a training event that will really test us all the way from the strategic level straight down there to the nuts and bolts of the tactical level. At the same time, Forces Command is rotating to the combat training centers. They're doing very robust and well-resourced home station training. Forces Command leading the fight on that. And then at the combat training centers, TRADOC's role is the operational environment. So TRADOC is ensuring that the battlefield that we're practicing on at the lowest level, at the lowest real level where it's the full combined arms team, brigade combat teams plus, accurately reflects the type of battlefield we know we're going to face in terms of the electronic warfare, the cyber environment, the enemy capabilities, air, unmanned aerial systems, you name it. That's all being infused, and our units, if they don't know how to tackle these problems, they're coming up with the creative solutions or driving the requirements we need to fully modernize and push ourselves into the future.
Let me ask you about that, because one of the concerns that folks have is that the force may not as fully, that we're very fond of talking about how we want to fight a war, as opposed to being maybe as open and clear-eyed about how the adversary is going to fight us. For example, the Chinese have focused a lot of effort on anti-access area denial capabilities, how to confound us at each step. Some capabilities we know, other capabilities we don't. How is that process of educating the entire force to wrap their minds around the complexities of how our adversaries will fight us, as opposed to how we may imagine that we're going to prosecute some of these fights?
Okay, well, so I can speak for the Army, I can't speak for the Joint Force. What I can tell you about the Joint Force is they are all in on not a fanciful future on how we want to fight, but the nuts and bolts of deconstruction of enemy capabilities or competitors' capabilities so that they can prosecute the offensive operations they'll need to be successful. Inside of Training and Doctrine Command, or getting inside the mind of today's soldiers, all the way from soldiers' initial entry, intermediate level training at the Command and General Staff College and the Captain's Career Course, all the way up the line to the Army War College, the curriculums have been changed to reflect the realities of the modern battlefield. And so let's go ahead and dive right down to the tactical. We know the type of battlefield that we're going to be on is going to require a different kind of a soldier. They're going to need to be fit, well-trained, highly disciplined. And it all starts with fitness. So the first obstacle we're taking on is we're changing the fitness culture in the Army. So you probably heard of the Army Combat Fitness Test. And man, it's tough. Let me tell you about that. It is tough. We've had the same fitness test for the last 35, 40 years, ever since I've been in the Army. Actually, it kind of debuted right when I came on board in the early 1980s. But now we've kind of shifted our focus on what kind of soldier do we want. So the Secretary and the Chief told us that we're going to have a multi-domain operations capable force starting to be fielded in 2028. So that next generation combat vehicle, when the ramp drops, we want to make sure that the soldier that runs out of the back and the leader that leads that formation are physically fit, highly disciplined, and well-trained. And that all starts with Training and Doctrine Command. So the combat fitness test, it's tough, stressing new parts of the body, trying to build the capabilities that we need. It's a different kind of a fight. It's going to require a tougher soldier, male, female. It's going to improve the fitness of everybody. And all of that, TRADOC's role is developing it, fielding it, which is still in testing right now. And then also we're going to reconfigure how our units are manned. So when we look at holistic health and fitness, we're going to go just beyond what happens at physical training. We're also going to look towards a holistic health and fitness of the force with physical trainers, dietitians, the medical professionals that we need at echelon so that we can conduct this tougher training, still maintain our capability. Now, the human beings that we're recruiting off the streets, they're really not much different now than they're going to be in 2028. So we have to take those young men and women in, and we have to bring them up to the Army standard. And it's going to be a tough fight, but it's going to be a worthy fight.
Talk to us a little bit about the people strategy. I wanted to ask you a little bit about it, and you were talking a little bit about it in terms, but talk to us about the TRADOC people strategy that you're implementing.
Well, I got to correct you there. It's not the TRADOC people strategy. It's the United States Army's people strategy. And it's
Sorry, I ascribe a lot of some of these service-wide training things to, but you're absolutely right. It's an Army-wide thing.
You're too kind. No, actually, it's really a radical shift in the way we do business, from the way we acquire the talent that's out there. And the last time we talked, we were in the middle of the fist fight, as we like to say. Trying to recruit the soldiers that we needed to fill and grow the Army. And that was a tough fight. It's the most difficult recruiting environment the all-volunteer force has ever faced. And here's a news flash. Under Major General Frank Muth and Command Sergeant Major Tabitha Gavia, with the support of the entire United States Army, we were able to not only meet our recruiting goals of 68,000 for the active component, but we actually increased the level of quality as compared to other years. Higher number of high school graduates, higher number of a lower number of waivers for any kind of medical issue, lowest number of moral waivers, and just a phenomenal performance. So, the first thing we're doing is we're going to do a better job of bringing in the type of talent that we want. And one way we're going to do that is we're going to figure out a better way to select soldiers to be recruiters. We're also looking for the best soldiers to train those new soldiers when they come in. So part of this strategy is to use a battery of tests to identify the type of non-commissioned officers we want in both of those roles. So this people strategy, it's more than just an assignment strategy. It's really a holistic look at how we acquire talent, how we manage that talent, and how we take advantage of some of the skills that are out there. Good example. So we've recently created the cyber branch. And cyber branch is new, it's being filled from the bottom up. So young enlisted soldiers are being brought in and young officers are being assessed. But we don't have, experienced colonels, field grade officers. We don't have a plethora of those. So one of the aspects of the Army people strategy is that in certain cases, when required, if those skills reside out in the great American public, and we can acquire that talent and bring it in, they don't have to come in, at the starter level. They could actually come in, I believe, if I've got this correct, I may not be right, but at the colonel level, certainly at lieutenant colonel field grade, depending on the skills and experiences that they have.
That's right. We talked to the chief about it, and that direct accession strategy is something very, very new, to be able to get some of these core skill sets both on the non-commissioned officer side as well as on the commissioned officer side, and to bring them in up to a colonel grade. But that changes your recruiting challenge, right? Because now you have a conventional recruiting system, a conventional ROTC system through which you bring people into the service, and now you're going to have a different system. How are you thinking about how you're going to accomplish that? I mean, is it that the Ted Martins of the world are out there at conferences and go, hey, that speaker was a really good speaker, we should approach him? I mean, how are you wrapping your mind around how you do this very, very different recruiting challenge?
Well, the thing I would tell you is one thing we learned at the end of the FY18 was that we had a FY18 was a hard year, let's be honest. We failed to meet our accessions goal. FY19, part of the process of winning, because winning matters, like the chief says, we took a deep dive into our own recruiting apparatus, on all aspects of the recruiting apparatus, and we have an industrial age system, and we're living in an information age world. So we're in the process of changing how we recruit and how we market ourselves, and I think you're going to see those changes coming up pretty quickly, from the nuts and bolts software that our recruiters use, to the way we're trained, to the way we market to America's youth, and more importantly, to the greater American public. We're having to break through the barrier of the folks that really don't know the opportunities that exist in the Army. So this is all part of a holistic, this is not a Band-Aid approach, this is a tidal wave approach, I would say, to getting after, upping our game, so we can go after this talent.
Let me ask you one thing which I thought was interesting before we talked, so I want to make sure that you convey it in the conversation as well, which is the methodical nature. So you think, there are those who look at, for example, Chinese and Russian capabilities as so formidable that the anti-access area denial, the methodical nature with which these adversaries are looking to confound us, whether it's through the application of disinformation, and I do have a question about that. So you're confident that you are deconstructing that threat. Tell the audience what you told me before we taped about how to think about this threat, how to take it seriously, but also to look at it realistically.
Well, I'm looking through the lens of training and doctrine command. So, I read all the literature. Most Army leaders, both from even our civilian leadership and our military leadership, are constantly studying what's going on in the world out there. Personally, I don't think the enemy's 10 feet tall. I think that in 1940, they thought the Ardennes was impenetrable. A lot of people think that the island, the island outposts the Chinese have are impenetrable. Let's just call that the Maginot Line. Who in their right mind would bet on a static defense? So, an offensively minded military like we have, specifically in the Army, really these type of challenges, wherever they are in the world, the enemy is not 10 feet tall. And I know from what I've observed and participated in the last 18 months in Training and Doctrine Command, our senior leadership is fully engaged on creating the conditions where we can succeed.
So let's talk about the information disinformation space for a second. We asked the chief about this as well, but I would like to get your take on it because you're interfacing directly in terms of preparing training for the entire force. There is a real concern about how Russia uses information and disinformation operations. We see the Chinese being very, very clever on how they're using information, for example, in Hong Kong as a weapon.
I don't know, they don't seem to be doing so well in Hong Kong right now, but I'm not assessing their performance.
But let me take it to how do we make sure that we are better preparing ourselves, protecting ourselves, preparing soldiers to operate in what could be a very, very contested information environment where they're getting all sorts of messages that are designed to undermine cohesion, undermine faith, undermine trust. As we've seen, the Russians were very successful, whether in the UK, in France, in Scandinavia in their efforts, Germany, the US elections. How is the Army thinking about how it protects this important part of the American population from being subjected to these kinds of operations, especially in a conflict situation that could make a difference?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of the chief, but I would, one look at the investment that the U.S. Army has made in information operations, Army Cyber Command, the almost $10 billion investment at Fort Gordon, Georgia, both in the school and in the command and in the reorganization of the Army. You might be interesting to note that the commanding general of Fort Gordon is not a signal officer by trade. He's a 35 series military intelligence, but he's a cyber warrior. I'm just saying, if you have not seen the change that the Army has taken, the easiest place to see the stark black and white is at the Army Cyber Center and the Cyber School. But I can tell you that from TRADOC's perspective, our role in this is to make sure that we have a tough, realistic training environment. And Tom Greco, the G2 of Training and Doctrine Command, and his team of experts make sure that we accurately replicate what the Army can do. And it's tough business, and those combat training center rotations, they really are the payoff when it comes to where we're putting our money for training.
And let me ask you one last question, and you mentioned cyber, and I wanted to ask you about that. There is a concern among some that the force is not as comfortable in cyber, in some aspects of information, AI, big data. Are you satisfied that that training curriculum is bringing folks in at a more junior level, but also addressing skill set, right? I mean, senior leaders find it more comfortable to be very comfortable in their principal warfare specialty area. They get great air operations as well. Joint tours make them familiar with sea power. But every once in a while you talk to senior leaders who are like, I'm not as comfortable as I should be in the cyber or the electronic warfare domains. What are you doing as part of the curriculum and the training from top down to make sure that everybody is as comfortable in these domains where victory where victory will depend or loss will happen?
Well, I think, the younger generation that's confronting this at the combat training centers is, they're being, from the ground up, they're learning this world. And then some of the key leaders that have actually served, a great example, General Townsend, who's now the AFRICOM commander, General Funk, who just came from command of Operation Inherent Resolve, where they had to, fight in this new domain of the battlefield. They're very comfortable to handle the middle that's moving up. I think if you were to take a look at the courses that are being held at the Combined Arms Command under Lieutenant General Mike Lundy, the specific training we put our division commanders and our corps commanders through, and then what we do at the MCTP that is really specifically designed to train those corps and division staffs, with a CTC-like experience. I think we're making rapid progress, much more rapid than many suspect.
Lieutenant General Ted Martin, the Deputy Commanding General of the United States Army Training and Doctrine Command. Sir, it's always an honor and pleasure to talk to you, and we're looking forward to seeing you at Fort Eustis.
Hey, victory starts here, and don't forget that winning matters.